So, welcome. We're going to get started here. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I guess, yeah, welcome if you're new. Welcome back if you're familiar. My name is Jen. I'm with innerworkcoaching.life. And today I wanted to sit down and talk with my friend Erik. We've been actually planning this for a little while already, talk about polyamory specifically. And kind of that will segue into probably a few other areas, knowing how the conversations usually flow. So we'll talk about polyamory and sexual orientation and kind of our perspective on this idea and how it integrates with embodying unconditional love and freedom and a sense of liberation and empowerment versus we'll get into like how we see things and how Erik sees things versus how I see things and different perspectives and things like that. So but as an intro, this is going to be about like focused on polyamory and sexual orientation and how that relates to spirituality and self-ownership and freedom and like an internal sense of freedom, because that's kind of what it's all about. So
Yeah. Should be interesting.
absolutely. So we don't have a plan. I don't really have a plan, but the number one thing that I really kind of focus on in a lot of my emotional work and stuff, inner work and healing work, is the unconditional love aspect and the infinite love aspect, because like my experiences with monogamy have been very like kind of trapped, you know what I mean? Like you end up feeling trapped and you feel like someone's trying to own you. And especially for me personally, because I've always been a musician. I've always been like drawn to being on stage and talking to people and very friendly and open and, you know, that sort of thing. But when I'm with someone, they end up getting jealous about that. You know, they end up being like, well, you're mine. I can't
Yeah.
share you with the rest of the world, even if you're meant to send some kind of message or share your ideas with the world. I can't share you. And that has always rubbed me just the wrong way, you know?
Well, yeah, I think it's really difficult for people that in a relationship sense to really be able to share. I think
Hmm.
that's something that we're kind of conditioned out of and conditioned into this sense that you have a partner and they're yours.
Hmm.
And then you spend your entire life being possessive, and then I think it's a cycle that people get stuck into. And yeah, and when people start looking into or start discussing the concept of non-monogamy or something, that's a thing that people struggle with a great deal, is how to overcome the sense of jealousy.
Right. Well, and when we really get down to it, that jealousy, um, that sense of wanting to own the other person, of wanting them to be yours, it's an insecurity thing, you know, because you want to know that you can depend on someone, right? You want to
Mhm.
know that you can trust that person. But that also kind of comes from a need for control, because um if you trust that person and they break your heart or they break that trust in some way, whether they're doing it intentionally to hurt you or not, usually it's not. Usually it's a self-preservation thing, right? So it's
Yeah,
normally not even with bad intentions. It's normally just like a there's usually some reasons for it. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
and you don't know what those reasons are if you shut down your communication, and that sense of ownership or entrapment or whatever, you know, kind of shuts down the communication aspect. Because then, I mean, for me, it was always like, well, I can't be myself now. I'm not allowed to be myself. And if I'm myself, I'm not going to be accepted, you know? And that whole thing, trying to hold somebody else responsible for your feelings, it ends up with you taking your emotions, your negative and toxic emotions, out on that person and holding them responsible for it, which is actually very disempowering, because you're giving over your power over your sense of, or over your state of being and your emotions, to a person that's outside of you who doesn't even have all the information that you have, you know?
True. Yeah. Well, there's a saying that a poly friend of mine had uh, said that I thought was really nice. It was a really nice statement. That kind of encapsulates very succinctly the concepts around polyamory. Actually, a lot of things, but the saying is, anger is pain turned inside out. Jealousy is fear turned inside out.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of sums it up really nicely. We should also start, because I don't know that everybody really understands what polyamory or non-monogamy is.
Right. Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
explain that. Um,
Well,
I
so you're more of a veteran to this than I am, you know,
yeah.
like I'm just kind of exploring, and I've found labels now that fit me.
Mhm.
Um and in large part thanks to you. So just for my viewers, for our viewers, Erik and I have been friends for going on 20 years. I think it's like
Yep.
18 years or so. I
Yeah.
was 16 when I first met you. And
Ugh.
remember, we met through Bob.
Mhm. Yep. I
And
remember
the
that
whole
very
open
well.
mic scene.
Yeah.
And you freaked me out at first, because you were like so much older than me
Hmm.
back then, you know what I mean? Like now it's
Yeah.
like, oh, whatever, you know what I mean? But
It-
back then, a decade was like, whoa.
yeah.
At 16 years old, somebody's 10 years older than you, and you're just like, oh
Mhm.
man. And all I was worried about was getting in trouble. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, oh my gosh, what kind of trouble am I going to get into, talking to this guy? But we ended up hitting it off so well and connecting on such a deep level that the friendship it just endured,
Yeah.
without
Oh yeah.
any, there was never any like bad blood at all, ever. And I think that was part of the reason why you freaked me out a little bit,
Mhm.
back then, because I was so used to being in like a fighting kind of environment, where, there's always something to be scared of.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Well,
so why don't you take a minute and like explain the idea behind polyamory,
okay.
and kind of give people a definition of it, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, and then maybe you can kind of follow up with your own
My take on
or-
things that I've
yeah,
kind of developed over the last couple years. Yeah.
exactly. So I think when people hear the term non-monogamy or polyamory or something, they have a tendency to immediately gravitate towards sex.
Right.
Like it's all about sex. Oh, what are you, some kind of swinger or something? Like no, it it's
And
very
that's
different than that.
okay too.
Well, and that is a form. It really, the important thing to note with non-monogamy, it's a it's different for everybody. They all kind of have, everybody has their own way of doing things and their own goals and their own sort of attitudes, their own particular style, I
Yeah.
guess. Sort of like, I guess you could. It's kind of like any. It's like an art form almost. Everybody does things a little differently. But in general, ethical non-monogamy is a relationship style where you have a relationship with a bunch of different people. Like you have multiple partners, and maybe your partners have other partners. Sometimes it's just three people, sometimes it's four, sometimes it's a very big family of partners. And people have different uh, takes on it. Some people believe that there should be a hierarchical structure where you have your primary partner, and then they're the most important.
See, and I don't agree with that, but
Yeah, well,
continue.
it probably works better if you have a marriage. If you're
Yeah.
married to somebody and you engage in polyamory, that uh, your relationship with your married partner is the primary one, because maybe you have kids or something, and it all
Right.
kind of takes precedent over the secondary relationships. But yeah, I agree that kind of labeling it that way sort of diminishes the other relationships, because every partner in that relationship is important in their own way,
Hmm.
just maybe in different ways.
Right. Exactly.
But it is, there are people who do that there's a primary and then secondary relationships and tertiary relationships and stuff. But in general, it's less about sex and more about love.
Right.
And it comes from this idea that love is infinite. Time is not infinite, so you obviously have that kind of restriction on the relationships. You can't have a functioning multi-dimensional relationship with like 50 people.
Right.
No way to maintain that. You would never be able to spend
Well,
time.
and that's where you have to be discerning about who you choose to spend your time with.
Hmm.
Like I have right now, well, I guess really it's just two, but it doesn't matter because it fluctuates between like 2, 3, and 4. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I like to have the freedom and the openness to be able to meet new people and connect
yeah.
on that level and get to know them and see if there's something there. You know
Well,
what I
yeah,
mean?
and partners come and go,
Right.
and maybe you have a romantic partner who you kind of just things just slide away or whatever, that maybe it kind of fizzles out. But
Right.
a lot of times in poly relationships, you stay friends with those ex partners, I guess, and so they're
Exactly.
still important in your life. That's been my experience, at least. A
Well, and
lot of
that's the love aspect of it because you
Mhm.
don't ever stop loving someone that you've loved.
Sure.
The emotional like thing that really kind of strikes me about being poly versus trying to fit myself into monogamy is that when you're when you're in a monogamous relationship, the ending is always so difficult because it's like you're losing something.
Yeah.
And it's like it has to be, it's like they were so close that then for it to end, you have to make them into an enemy almost, you
Yeah, you have
know?
to burn a bridge, basically, and
Right. And that's
that's really
not,
bad.
yeah, that's not healthy. That's not the healthy
No.
way to go about
So
it because that also tells you that the communication was never up to par, you
sure.
know?
Well, and that's actually something I was going to get to too. That's very, very important with uh, non-monogamy or polyamory. That communication is vital.
Yeah.
That you need to talk about things and be open and converse. If you feel something, like if you're starting to feel bad about a situation or good about a situation, right? That it should be communicated to partners.
Hmm.
Um, that's a very important aspect, and I think that is something that people struggle with a lot, because generally in a monogamous relationship, obviously communication is important, but it doesn't matter. People don't have to communicate, and they usually don't in monogamous relationships. It's just
Well,
a
and then you
simple,
bring the jealousy into it, and then they feel like they can't see.
yeah.
Because I've had the experience where a partner of mine was jealous of me just talking to a fucking cashier. You know what I mean? Like, what am I gonna do? Like
Yeah, and
I can't get a job and talk to people. Like that's what
mhm.
that says. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, you were awfully friendly with that cashier. Like.
Well, and that's something that has to be worked on, and it's a continual evolution, and you're never. It's not like I mean, I've had a lot of non-monogamous relationships, and I wouldn't consider myself an expert. I think I'm just learning. I think you're
Yeah,
never actually done growing and learning. There's always more
there's
that you
always
need
more.
to
Yeah.
understand. But something that I really enjoy the most, actually, about poly relationships is the connection you have with your partner's partners.
Hmm.
You I've become friends with partners of partners, and in a way that transcends the relationship. It's not just a casual thing like, oh hey, I have to be friendly to you. It's like, no, I actually made really good friends
Yeah.
who are still friends to this day, even
Well,
if the
because
relationship doesn't.
it's like what we were talking about, I think last time I was here. Um, about like, well, if you're attracted to this person and this person is attracted to you, then chances are they're going to be attracted to similarly minded people. And
Yeah,
like, you get to the
exactly.
point where you look way beyond the physicalness, you know, it
Mhm.
doesn't, the hobbies don't matter so much. The things that people do don't matter so much. It's more about an attitude, you know, it's
Sure.
more about a sense of allowing the person to be themselves and not worrying, you know,
Mhm.
because you don't look at their behaviors and actions, and or say for example you don't hear from somebody for a while. It's a lot easier in poly relationships. Like if I were to be pursuing a monogamy thing, I would be all worried, like, did I do something wrong? Did I screw up somewhere? Why aren't you talking to me? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But when you understand that people have lives, that,
Yeah.
because that's another thing that I found is everybody that I connect with has their own shit going on. They have their own stuff. They have their own projects. They have their own ambitions. Everybody's very like, let's do something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Well, in
it's
monogamous,
way healthier, I think, in order to connect with people on a really deep level, to have your own stuff too. It's not like you're constantly up each other's butts, you know what I mean?
no, exactly. And in a monogamous relationship, it's sort of like your whole identity is dependent on that relationship. But
Yeah.
in a poly relationship, it's like you're an individual, and your partnerships and things that your relationships you're involved in, it just enhance that.
Yes.
And I want to get to
Exactly.
something. There's a really important aspect of polyamory that uh, I think is something that I still have to work on a little bit, but it's the idea that you flip jealousy around. So
Mhm.
in a normal monogamous relationship, if there's some kind of competition, right? Somebody is,
It's the other person's fault.
well, and you feel jealous. You feel like you're
Yeah.
threatened somehow by your partner. Let's say your husband or wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. If they if they have any kind of positive experience, like they're being happy because they're having fun with another person,
Hmm.
and it generally involves sex for whatever reason. I don't understand that, but that's
I
where
think that's
a lot of people,
programming. Yeah.
yeah. But let's just say people get jealous. They feel defensive. They want to protect what they have, keep somebody and trap them in and hold them close and stuff, and
Mhm.
they feel threatened by
And that actually
just,
pushes people away,
well, it does.
which is the
Uh,
funniest thing about it. You
yeah,
know?
and so, but in the poly system, there's a concept called compersion, and what that is a sort of a mental state, I guess, that you strive toward, which is basically that you feel happy because your partner is happy.
Yeah.
So if it's like if your partner is on a date with somebody, right, somebody else, you're not jealous that they're on a date with somebody else. You're looking forward to hearing about how much fun they had, and if they
Right.
had a fun time, like, that's good. You're happy because of that, and happy because a secondary relationship is going well. Those things, because they enhance everybody's life.
Right.
It makes the relationship better. Um,
And that took me a while, but and it starts with a conscious decision. Like, you have to be okay with whatever decisions that your partners or partner, are making.
mhm.
They're their own people. And the whole reason why you love this person is because they are their own person. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And to diminish that, to kind of like try and own that or try and control it, and that's the whole thing where you let go of the need for control,
Mhm.
because that need for control over another person is kind of where the toxicity starts growing.
Yeah.
At least that's been my kind of experience within myself. Is if i'm if I'm sitting here, first of all, if I'm bored, Okay. If I
Mhm.
don't have anything else to focus on, if I'm not working on myself and working towards being the person that I want to be independently on my own, self owning myself, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
being who I would like to be and whatever. And you refine that as you go, you know, you get more and more into detail. It's very complex and it's very complicated, but it's also very simple at the same time, which is kind of, you know, but when you're when you're kind of in that place where you understand that you can't control the other person, they are going to be themselves. And whatever that entails, you have to make the conscious decision to be like, okay, well, I love that person no matter what. It's just like parenting. And it's kind of weird to bring it back
Yeah,
to that,
no,
but it
that's a
is like
good point.
parenting. You know, you have to, like, I have teenagers now, and I understand that with teenagerhood comes, you know, crazy hormones and emotions, and both of my teenagers identify as LGBT in some way, and I identify as LGBT. And like, so you can't have the need for control. If you
No.
kind of flow with it and you allow them to communicate their perspective with you, then you're way more able to help them and guide them and give them your perspective and then be open and receptive to it. Versus if you need control over your child, if you feel like you have to be, you know, well, I'm a parent, not a friend, and you know.
Well, okay, and that actually does kind of connect nicely with the concept of polyamory. The idea that if you love someone, set them free, and if you really
Exactly.
matters, if anything matters, they'll come back. And
Yeah.
but so in a monogamous relationship, there is that need for control because if someone else comes in and they're better, let's say,
Or you
they're going.
perceive them as better.
Yeah, well, it's the other partner. So it's like a switch. You can only be in this box or that box. So if
Mhm.
you're in
That's
this
binary
relationship,
thinking.
yeah, if you're in this relationship and someone else comes in, then you flip. The partner flips from this relationship to that relationship. But in poly, that doesn't happen. It's fluid, and
Yeah.
so there's never that risk of, well, I mean, in some cases people gravitate towards people who they agree with more or they feel better around, but
Right, but
it's
you're not
never a
hanging your
switch.
own self-worth on the other person's opinion. You know,
Yeah, and,
you're
and
not
you
hanging your self-worth on the other person and their lives. You're developing your own self-worth,
sure,
basically.
and a partner, you don't lose a partner.
Mhm.
That's the thing. Like, people think, oh well, if my partner goes on a date with somebody and they have sex and they
Then
have
they're not
fun,
mine
that,
anymore.
yeah, they're going to disappear. Well, no, they're not. They're going to just come home and tell you about the experience or whatever if you have good communication, and it doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah.
you can. th- it's not like a mutually exclusive kind of situation. Or I guess a zero sum game in that regard. Having a relationship with another person doesn't take away the first relationship,
Mhm.
and it does actually bring a lot of enhancement too.
Right. It's allowing people the freedom to make their own decisions and being okay with it. And that's really kind of the basic thing that it comes down to, with polyamory as well as with parenting, is like,
Hmm.
uh, every person that you deal with, and this has really taught me a lot about like how multifaceted people are, and how um because you have so many different aspects to yourself, you know. I mean, just look at you and look at me, you know, like you're into music and production and videography and 3D printing
Hmm.
and working on cars and building shit, and there's so much stuff. There's It's almost natural for people to have, especially if you're cultivating your own interests and you're cultivating your own goals and you're doing all this stuff. You want like-minded people in each category, kind of thing, you know, like for
Yeah.
each
Oh yeah.
passion
Well,
that
and
you have. And people have more than one passion. It's
sure.
foolish to fall into the trap of thinking that people are only passionate about one thing. That's unrealistic, you
Well,
know.
okay. And here's another thing that's really important, that in regards to polyamory, no partner is going to be everything to a person. That you
Exactly.
can't possibly be the perfect partner. Well, okay, maybe there are some. There's some really great relationships, that monogamous relationships, where they just happen to find the right person. But
Yeah.
you're never going to be everything to everyone, and it's okay, because other people can fulfill those, like, things that you enjoy doing. Because in poly relationships, it's more about doing things. you
Hmm.
you go and enjoy experiences that your other partner doesn't like doing, right?
Right.
You get along in one way, maybe in a raising a household or something, like you really get along that way. But then one partner really likes football, and but the other doesn't, and so if they hooked up with somebody that does like football, well, they can enjoy that and then come home, and
And
you
it's
know it's
perfectly
it's good.
fine. It's not
Yeah.
an actual threat. That
Well, and because
that threat to our security is all in
Mhm,
our heads. That's all our
it is.
perception.
It is, and it's interesting too that you mentioned parenting and kids and stuff, because that's actually a really good analogy for being able to love many people. Because people do have this perception that you only love one person, and if you love someone else, somehow you're not loving the other person
Oh
as
my
much.
gosh, I wonder
So,
how that's related to narcissism.
well, it could, yeah.
Because the narcissist usually picks one golden child and one scapegoat. And I wonder if that's like a subconsciously programmed aspect that comes from kind of this monogamy ownership thing,
It
you
could
know?
be, but in
Wow, that's, huh.
explaining it to the outside, the outside world, people who don't have any experience with polyamory, I usually use that analogy, the children analogy, because people think it's a zero sum game. That if you love one person, right? So you have your primary
You
partner.
can't love
You love,
anybody else.
yeah. Well, if you love someone else, then somehow there's less love going to the other partner. Well,
Right.
think about kids. Think about kids. If you had two kids, does that mean you can only love one kid? And if you love both kids, then you're splitting your love into half, and they only get a little bit. And if you love this kid, then that means you don't love that one. No, you can equally love everybody. You could have 10 kids, and they're all equal,
But they're
because
all different. See, and
they are.
sometimes those differences in how you love them, or how you express your love can be perceived as something else.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but that all depends on mindset too. It
Hmm.
all depends on your perception,
Yeah, it
that's
does.
perception is everything.
Uh, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm,
I
definitely.
think that's great. Like because I talk to my teenagers about all kinds of stuff, and we're very open. We're very like, communicative, and especially because, my son just celebrated his 1 year anniversary of when he came out as gay.
Hmm.
And he's thriving. It's like allowing them to be themselves and
Yeah.
loving them for who they are, not for who you want them to be. Because like as
Mhm.
parents, a lot of times we'll project that's where you get these crazy like pageant moms and shit, like where
Yeah.
they're just living vicariously through their children, and you end up seeing this other person as an extension of yourself. And that's actually what narcissistic personality disorder is, which is kind of funny, is
Hmm.
they see other people as extensions of themselves. So that's why they need so much control over the other, is because anything that the other does is a reflection on them. You see what I'm saying? But when
Yeah.
you let go of that need for control over another human being, and you embrace them for who they are, which a lot of times will happen too if you're embracing things about yourself that you didn't understand before, that maybe you were told were shameful,
Hmm.
or things to be not okay with. Oh, it's against the rules. You can't have more than one partner. You're a slut. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're a whore.
Well,
And
it's funny too, actually, in this day and age, you'd be better off coming out to your parents as gay, or your family or whatever, over being poly. Like,
mhm.
people understand if you're gay, but like if you say poly, they're like, whoa. It's all
Right. Poly is kind
crazy.
of like trans in that way, where
Yeah.
people don't fully understand it yet. They're just kind of like, oh
And
my gosh, this is so weird. It so goes against, everything that I feel that I know.
exactly, and that's kind of what I'm hoping to get out there is some a little bit better understanding of what it actually is all about.
Yeah.
Because again, people for whatever reason, I don't understand why, but people always gravitate towards sex, and that defines
It's not
everything
even
they think about.
about sex, though. It's
No.
so funny because, like, it used to be all about sex when I was going for the monogamous aspect,
Yeah.
and I felt like I had to put up with a bunch of crap, basically. Like, I had to conform to what my partner wanted, and if I didn't, then that somehow made me a bad girlfriend or bad wife or whatever,
Hmm.
and my story is kind of different anyway because like there was abuse there, but at the same time, how far-fetched is it really? Because on a subconscious and emotional level, a lot of people are carrying abusive and toxic tendencies around, myself included.
Hmm.
And like until I was brave enough to look at that about myself, like how am I treating my children and my partners in ways that are controlling, even if it's control through something like being nice or
Yeah.
sex or
Hmm.
whatever, things that people don't usually think of because people think of controlling and abusive and they think of violence. Well, emotional manipulation takes a lot of different forms. Things that don't look
True.
abusive can also be abusive, so
Yeah,
it's
well, and
kind of an
it's a
interesting.
spectrum.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
are variable levels of that, and I don't know. Being a fuzzy logic person, I don't know quite where the term abuse would line up with
Mhm.
manipulation. But yeah, I think that's definitely a thing.
Well,
That,
yeah, and it's not just black and white. You can't think of it that way. It's not somebody is abusive or is not abusive. Everybody has the capability to either become toxic or not. You see
mhm,
what I'm saying? Like we can
yeah,
all fall into bad habits and taking
sure.
our emotions out on other people, and that comes right back to the polyamory thing, holding someone else responsible for your emotions. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned over the last several years, probably about 5 years now, maybe a little bit longer. But
Mhm.
one of the most valuable lessons that I have learned is to not hold other people responsible for the way that I feel, to be able to process my own emotions and allow the other person to have their emotions and be okay with it. Because guess what? We all have emotions, it's just,
Yeah.
it's a personal decision whether you want to take out your emotions on other people or not. And I choose not to
Hmm.
now, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and it's really good. I think for me, it's been a really interesting experience. A pretty amazing journey actually of self discovery and um, learning about how to interact with people and in general actually the poly experience has been very good internally for
Mhm.
me.
Me too. Me
Yeah.
too. I'm still
I,
kind of a newbie, but me too. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
No, and it's okay because I think if anybody claims that they know everything about it and they're an expert, well, they're probably not right.
Yeah.
Because it is a continual journey. It's sort of like science. There is no science isn't set. It's a process of
There's no be
evolution.
all end all. It's
Yeah.
constantly evolving and moving and growing. And that's where we kind of can get into the whole soul aspect of it. Because really, what's the soul here for? Why are we having this physical experience with our soul? Our soul is here for learning,
Mhm.
basically. And how do you best learn? You best learn through experience because you can know all you want to, but until you apply it to your own life and have that kind of revelatory moment, it really
Yeah.
doesn't make a difference how much you know.
Well,
And
and
the
I think
people that claim to know everything, they're usually the ones that don't know shit. You know what I mean? And then the people who are
yeah.
all humble about it and like, oh, I'm still learning and da da, those are normally the people that are the most authentic about what they're sharing because they're like, well, I don't know everything, so I encourage you to go and find out for yourself.
Yeah.
um
Well,
Yeah, and that's the whole idea, is getting people to think for themselves, you know?
sure,
What
and
works for you? Different things work for different people, you know?
exactly.
Poly works
And
for some, it doesn't work for others. Monogamy works for some people,
that's
you know?
very true.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's beneficial is that the challenge. If everything is good and working perfectly, well, you're never going to grow. You're never going to learn anything. There's
Mhm.
no incentive to explore, or there's never any lessons. And I think challenging yourself can only benefit you. And that's something that this experience for me has been a very challenging experience, but it's the best thing ever.
Yeah. Yeah, and, you know, so I wanna kinda share how I kind of came to this, you know, this idea, and how I kind of started opening up to it and embracing it, because you're the one who introduced me to the concept of polyamory.
Hmm.
And like ever since we met, I've always had like a deep respect for you, and I've always recognized that you are a very reasonable, like grounded, but also spiritual person, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so it's like a good balance, you know? And like and I've never seen you get angry. In all the years I've known you, I've never seen you get like pissed off and crazy, you know? I've never seen you do anything like stupid.
Yeah, it
Like
happens every
jump in a
once in a while.
fire or whatever, you know?
It'll happen every once in a while, but it's usually a small temporary thing. Most of the time, it has to do with when I am trying to make something, and I cut myself or hammer my
Mhm.
thumb or something. I'm like, oh, and that's
See,
when I
but
get
if you
pissed
don't
off.
hurt yourself, then it won't turn out right. That's what I've
Yeah.
heard. Like people think that if you don't get injured in some way, it won't turn out right,
Uh,
especially if you're working on building something or
yeah. All of my best projects have my own blood inside of them somewhere.
literally.
Yeah.
Yes. Blood, sweat, and tears. Come on. Yeah. It
Exactly.
serves a purpose.
Oh yeah. Oh, I
but but yeah, so when I first started really thinking about this stuff, and like the whole letting go of a need for control over another person, was was with this friend of mine that I never even met in person, that I completely fell head over heels in love for. And I've always had this weird, you know, attraction, and reflectively people who are married are attracted to me. Okay.
hmm,
And I think it's after the marriage has gotten stale. And I think that it's at a point, usually, where the person is realizing that there's more there. There's more out there that they could be experiencing, but now they're trapped, you know?
yeah.
And usually it's, what was that term? It's when you've invested so much already
Oh, the
that you
sunk cost fallacy.
yes, the sunk
Yeah.
cost fallacy. So
Hmm.
you've invested all this time and all this energy and all this love and all this effort into this relationship that you feel guilty for wanting out, you
Hmm.
know, and you stop yourself. You basically sabotage yourself, you know, because you think it's not okay to move on. Well, what about the other person? And we fool ourselves into thinking that it's for the other person that we're staying, when really everybody's fucking miserable and everybody wants out. They're just waiting for an excuse that's a good justification, rather than owning their own decisions.
Yeah.
You see what I'm
Selfish
saying?
motives.
Yeah.
Selfish
And
motives. Yeah.
and in order to get past that, you kind of have to get to a point where you embrace change. You embrace the idea of, you know what? This was fantastic while it was here. While in the
Yeah. Well,
present moment, it was so beautiful, but now it's becoming something not so beautiful, and I don't want to corrupt it anymore. So how do I
sure.
keep myself from corrupting it more? You know?
Well,
And
and
that
that's a good point. The life is a series of experiences, good and bad, and beneficial and destructive. And
mhm.
they're all valuable. I think, like you said, the relationship may have had a lot of value and been very wonderful for a time, but if things change, as they always do, entropy is just the way of the universe. Everything devolves. Like,
Yeah.
chaos is really it rules the operation of the universe. And so eventually things will degrade and things change, or people move on and they have different views, and that's okay. So the important thing, rather than destructively hanging on to a dead relationship, it's better to probably just appreciate the good that you
Hmm.
had, and move on to something new adventures,
Yeah.
and see it as that.
I think I think people are very like clingy to this idea of stability, and they hang it on another person, you know?
Yeah,
And they think that if their life is in upheaval of any kind, which guess what? Life will always throw you challenges, you know?
sure.
You you may never be totally stable, you know, and that's not a problem either, unless it's a problem in your own mind. And society, of course, says it's a problem because, you know, you got to have the house and the 2.5 kids and the car and the, you know, blah, 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 and the white picket fence and what have you. And that's what is considered normal, you know, but it's like once you let go of that idea and once you just kind of open up to, um, things being different, you know, things
Mhm.
not necessarily aligning with what you're planning or what you're attached to, then you open yourself up to all kinds of way cool new different experiences. Because like, who wants to feel trapped? That sense of security kind of always develops into a sense of being trapped. Not always, but you know, like a
Yeah.
lot of the time it'll develop into that, because what you thought was for you before may you may change your mind. You may, as you get to know this kind of life, your perception and your idea of what you want is going to change, because the more you get to know something, the more you can kind of make decisions based on what you know. And if you're unfamiliar with something, then that's resistance, right? Like,
Yeah.
automatically people are like, no, 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 no. You know, this is not familiar. This is devil worship, or this is, you know, whatever. And, or this is, you know, evil or wrong or bad. But it's not that simple. It's really not that simple. And
Well,
so a lot of times when you get to know something, like it took me getting to know what monogamy was like in order to figure out that that's not for me, you
mhm,
know. And I've had good relationships, I've had abusive relationships, I've been all over the spectrum. It hasn't been just all bad or all good, you know, it's been all kinds of different experiences.
mhm.
But really, like, trying to hang your self-worth and your emotions on this other person is not healthy.
Well, no,
At
you
least
shouldn't
for
be.
myself, you know, I don't know if it's like that for other people, but for myself, it was not a healthy way of being. So, like, once I started thinking about things differently, and once I started kind of letting go, because you have to allow the other person to be themselves too. If you want to be able to be yourself, you have to allow them to be themselves. And that requires not wanting to control them on any level. And if you're in a place subconsciously where you feel the need for control on a subconscious level, it will come out in your behaviors, even if you verbally say that you don't agree with it. Even if you are verbally like, no, I don't think this is right, it'll still come out in your behaviors. And that's the thing where awakening comes in.
Yeah.
Like, shining light on the subconscious, on the unconscious aspect, is like, how are you behaving, and is your behavior aligning with what you actually say you believe? Because if your behavior and your words are hypocritical against each other, then other people are going to see it before you. And they'll, you
Mm.
know, sometimes they'll point it out, or sometimes it'll come out as like other toxic, like abusive kind of behavior. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it like all ties back. It all ties back, and it's all connected. And it's so weird.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot to digest there. And um, so
Yeah, that was a big one.
yeah. But
Hairball.
the idea that your self-worth is dependent on another person, I think that's self-destructive,
Mhm.
because if you depend on somebody else's opinion of you or love or whatever to bolster your own sense of self-worth, if anything changes, then your self-worth, just the bottom falls out of it, and that's it.
So now
Versus
that leads back to parenting, because we
Mhm.
are influenced very heavily about that by our parents. If
Yeah,
we are taught to hang on their every word and to take on their opinions as beliefs because forming our own opinions or asking questions is wrong or bad, and we get reprimanded for it or punished for it or, criticized for it, then that teaches us to hang our self-worth on other people. And that's
sure.
kind of where I'm coming from with my teenagers, especially because I don't want them to make me the be all end all. I want them to think for themselves. I want them to make their own decisions and develop trust in themselves, and um to be love in my life, but not be emotionally codependent on what I think. You see what
Yeah.
I'm saying? And like, they have to be able to disagree with me, and they have to be able to talk to me about the tough topics, right? So we
Mhm.
talk about sex. We talk about my oldest was in a situation where she had to draw a boundary, and had she not, it might have turned into a kind of rapey situation.
Hmm.
And the fact that she did that, you know what I mean? Like,
That's
she doesn't integrate it as a bad thing about herself. She's like, what the fuck is this guy's deal? You know what I mean? Like, she's just like,
Mhm.
what was this guy's deal? You know what I mean? Like, and I'm really glad nothing happened, really. But it
Yeah.
was one of those things where it was a great example of the difference between like how I was raised versus how I'm choosing to raise my kids,
Well,
you
and
know?
that's a good a really good thing to think about. Like the parenting, there's a huge responsibility there, and that's not to say that because your kids are probably at that age where they can kind of start to be independent and think for
Mhm.
themselves. They have their own ideas and their own
Yeah.
destiny, right? But at some point when children are very young, that's where the parents really should be the end all be all. Like, okay, don't put the butter knife in the outlet. Don't touch
Right.
the hot stove. And being aggressive in that regard is a good thing. You're trying to give them really
Well,
important
yeah, if their
lessons.
safety is
But
at stake. Yeah.
yeah, but I think there's a huge responsibility as a parent. You're creating another life form. You're you
You're
should be
teaching
giving.
them. You're
Yeah, you should.
teaching them with everything that you say and do.
Hmm.
And a lot of times we'll project our shortcomings onto our kids, you know what I mean? Like,
Well,
um, and if that goes unchecked, then it can
yeah.
turn into something really bad,
Well, and yeah, I think parents are always
really
trying to.
toxic, I think.
It's sort of like somebody building something. Maybe you're programming or building a robot or something. You want it to do what you want it to do, but
Mhm.
the fact is, human beings are autonomous, and they're learning machines, and they will acquire information and kind of have their own sort of direction. So I think it's important as a parent to give your kids the proper tools to survive and thrive with whatever course they take, and
Right.
not necessarily dictate
And
their
you don't know where their lives are going to take them. You don't know
no,
what kind of experiences they're going to have,
no, well, and
you know,
you
and
can't even
it's not for you to control that, you know, you
sure.
can't control that. And trying to is just going to, it's a practice of insanity, basically, you know?
Well, and I think a lot of times parents are trying to make a better version of themselves,
Hmm.
but the problem with that is the world that the kids are getting raised into is a different world than you yourself grew up
Right.
in.
And they're not you.
Yeah.
They're not
And so,
you.
so
They're
it's like,
completely different people.
yeah, you can't apply the lessons of the past to the future necessarily. Well, maybe, but not,
You can to an extent,
yeah, not
but
consistently.
only like if it's the underneath, the underlying, like emotions are very, very similar across the board. And that's kind of where I play,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like,
Wow.
as
This is a,
far
it's
as
been a really interesting conversation. Like we're all over the place. Yeah.
well, yeah, but it all ties back, it's just like the embody unconditional love thing. um Everything literally can be traced back down to fear versus love. And a lot of times when you see people who are very hypocritical, they want to believe what they say verbally that they want to believe, but they don't actually have the inner work under their belt, the internal, you know um healing of the subconscious and healing of the programming and reconditioning, because you can recondition yourself. We're conditioned and we're programmed by society, by our parents, by religious affiliation, by all sorts of things. We're programmed. And the thing that I really want people to understand is that you are allowed to reprogram yourself. You're allowed to change your mind. You don't have to make a decision about, this is who I am and this is who I'm going to be for the rest of my life. That's not realistic. That's binary thinking, like we keep talking about,
Well,
that's
and
black
it's
and white.
it's harmful
Everything's on
too.
a yeah, it is harmful because then you get stuck. You get stuck in this one way of thinking and you try and force everybody else into this mold. And by doing that, you miss the beauty of it. You
Well,
miss the nuances, and you miss out on a lot of the like lessons and things that life can teach you and other people can teach you because you're too busy trying to make them fit, you know?
sure, and I think you're right about being able to reprogram yourself. We're basically biological computers. Well,
Exactly.
our brain is, I guess,
Yep.
and it's built through our experiences, and we can change those experiences and rewire it to some extent
Yeah.
at will.
At will.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is part of our power. That is part of our power as an individual, as a free will being, right?
Hmm.
Is to decide, okay, well, for example, I had to recognize how I was attracting abusive people, right? Because
Hmm.
abusers and abusees, okay, there's a reason why people who have been bullied become bullies. There's a reason why people who have been abused become abusers. And it's all rooted in disempowerment, right? So, in order
Okay.
to empower yourself, you have to really look at these things and look at things that repeat. If there's repetitive experiences in your life, right?
Hmm.
And you're not entirely sure where they're coming from, there's something there for you to learn. Because, like, as long as I'm thinking I need help from external sources and I have to, force these people into helping me somehow, helping, right? That's the whole homelessness situation kind of coming up. Um,
Hmm.
or like not being on my feet, you know and so if I'm like holding other people responsible for the mess that I made, that I helped create, and this goes back to parenting and polyamory. Some parents end up being very, very ashamed of their children. Think of someone who's like super Christian and their child comes out as trans or gay or whatever,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden they don't want anything to do with that child. They don't want to embrace them. They don't want to encourage the so-called, you know, flaw or whatever they think of it. It's bad, it's evil, it's wrong. Um, if you are so opposed to something, and this is what I've learned, another thing that I've learned too, is it's a reflection, right? So So the whole reason why you have like people like Catholic priests becoming pedophiles is because of the shame, because they're being shamed for um they're basically being told don't have any kind of sexuality at all. You know what I mean? But that perspective, um although it is more focused on, spirituality and trying to rise above the physicalness, the whole idea is to embrace your physicalness also and bring everything into balance, right? So
Hmm.
if you're shaming one part of yourself and you're just constantly beating up on yourself about that one thing, or you're, like, sex is bad, don't do it. Sex is bad, don't do it. You know what I mean? And that's what you're being fed all the time. It creates this toxic, corrupted version of the program, so to speak, right? That
Mhm.
basically manifests as really, really horrible behaviors and aggression towards other people, because you're ashamed of yourself,
Yeah.
essentially, and it's not healthy. So like what is taught is being looked at as, oh, this is right and this is good and this is pious and this is righteous and this is whatever, but really nobody wants to look deeper, and
No.
nobody wants to see how their good intentions are really creating the hell that a lot of people experience.
Hmm.
And that's another thing, like I work a lot with like consciousness and stuff, and consciousness is everything, perception is everything. And so if you're constantly being fed sex is bad, don't do it, then you're going to be ashamed of your sexuality and you're not going to express yourself in that way, and you're not going to allow yourself to explore, and you're going to feel trapped. And that sense of feeling trapped creates a sense of desperation, and that desperate times call for desperate measures, and that creates desperate behavior. And
Yeah.
so it's all connected. And so really, like, I think the main point in polyamory and talking about polyamory is empowerment. And it's about exploring and allowing yourself to explore and be okay with things that other people label as bad or wrong or whatever, because in your heart of hearts and in your subconscious mind that this is good.
Yeah.
And why would I shame myself over something that's a good thing? You know?
Sure. And also probably, I mean, wow, there's a lot of
I do that. I'm sorry.
yeah.
That's like what most of my
Well,
videos are like. I'm just like, blah. Here's what
I tend to do the same thing, so I totally understand that. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. Oh man, I think they are kind of interconnected, and I do agree that perception is reality. Basically, I don't think that there. Well, maybe there is an objective reality, but how would we ever know it when
Well, and then
everything?
you have to consider, how are we creating our reality? See, what's real now might not be real 20 years from now.
Mhm.
And just because it's real now doesn't mean it's the be all end all. Like we were talking about, everything's constantly moving and changing and fluid. It's not about being stuck in one place. you
Well,
know I
no,
don't know if I'm going to be polyamorous in 20 years. I might get married again, who knows? You know what I
well,
mean? Like, it could,
you
anything could happen.
you could get married and still be poly. Like
Right.
they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
well, and the universe is a dynamic place. There's nothing is ever stationary. Everything is in motion,
Yeah.
and everything's always changing. And the idea, going back to something you had said before about wanting this sort of consistency and things being stable. Well, you really can't have that. That's sort of an artificial construct. The
It is.
universe.
And real stability happens within your consciousness. Real stability happens when you have management of yourself, when you're able to actually, okay, no matter what happens out here, I know who I am. I love myself. I trust myself. That's where real stability happens.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with the external.
Sure, and I completely agree with that. That's the only stability you can really have. We to some extent control our local environment, things around us, but you
Yeah.
can't control everything.
Right.
And
And
the
shit
fact is,
happens
yeah,
all the
yeah,
time.
that's what I was going to say. The fact is, bad things happen, or things will happen, and it's unfortunate, but you just have to deal with it and move on,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay because it
Yeah.
happens to everybody. No one who has bad things happen to them, they're not the only person.
Right.
Everybody,
I think that's another huge misconception too, because I used to think I was all by myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're definitely not alone.
Yeah.
It happens to
Exactly.
everybody. It doesn't matter if you're homeless or the richest person on the planet. Bad things happen. You
Mm-hmm.
could. Steve Jobs died of cancer.
Yeah.
There you go. you know.
Yeah.
So I think you got to take your happiness where you can find it and appreciate what you have and
And
share.
allow the things that happen in your life to teach you and guide you into a
Yeah.
wiser kind of direction.
Sure,
You
the
know?
challenges are opportunities to learn. It's
Mm-hmm.
bad things that happen aren't necessarily bad. They're just challenges that teach you things and you become a better person as a result of it.
Exactly.
Nothing that happens is actually bad if you really think about it.
Yeah, if you really think about, I mean, we label it as good or bad, you
Yeah.
know, and yeah, there's a lot there too. Like, worry is one of my favorite examples. People think that if they don't worry about someone, that they're not loving them, but really when you worry about someone, you're actually helping create the things that you're worried about. Um, my parents used to tell me from the time that I was 14, you're going to wind up knocked up before you're 18 and blah, blah, blah. And look what happened. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? And it was like, and it was all fear based, it was all very fear based. And so
Yeah.
that's the programming that you know, people don't realize how it all links back to how we're conditioned. And we're
Sure.
conditioned to be afraid. We're conditioned to think that there's always something to worry about, and that if we're not worried, then we don't care. Well, the opposite is true. The more we worry, the more we actually create the things that we're worrying about, you
Well,
know,
and think
and
about this
attract
too.
them.
That what does worrying about something? What's the benefit from it? Like what?
There is no benefit.
Yeah.
That is the root cause of anxiety.
What you can't change things because you're worried about them. That's not going to change
Exactly.
anything. You might as well just go with the flow, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you can't change anything by worrying about it. No, you
No.
absolutely can't. You can think about it logically.
Mm-hmm.
What I like to do is run scenarios in my head. So like if I'm concerned about something, I'll do research on it. I'll learn, I'll try and gain some knowledge on whatever it is I'm worried about. Um, Typically I just try not to worry, because whatever happens, I'll deal with it as it comes.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if I am worried about something, if I find myself being worried, then a lot of times I'll just get familiar with whatever it is. And that'll ease a lot of the things. And then I think about, okay, what's realistic? You know, what's actually likely to be possible? And
Yeah.
if it's not likely, then chances are it won't happen. And even if it is likely, chances are it won't happen, you know?
Good point. Yeah. Well, true. Oh, yeah. We.
So it's 234.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I have 1434 on my clock, but then I go on 24-hour time, so a
Right, right.
a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
weird in that
I've
regard.
got the regular, layman, non-military.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think
But I
we've
think we've got what, like an hour of
yeah.
footage here. So I think I
Mhm.
think that's probably a good place to stop.
Yeah,
I
it's a
think
really
we
good
got some really good
introduction.
points in there. Yeah.
We could keep going, but I think maybe it'd be a good
Well,
we've
you
covered
still
a
have
lot.
stuff to do today, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I
think we're
do.
gonna call it
I
good for now, and we can always do another one to
all right. Yeah,
expand
we
on the
will.
ideas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right,
Right.
cool. So I'm going to stop this. So thank you very much for being here and for watching this video. I hope that um, that you were able to gain some kind of insight, or open up your perception a little bit to see a little bit more about how things really are versus the illusion, because we're we're in this illusion of binary black and white. It either is or it isn't kind of thinking, when really everything is everywhere. So that being said, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video, and I hope you check out innerworkcoaching.life for courses and other content. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. No matter where you are on your journey, please take good care of yourself from within on all levels. If you'd like more guidance, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or visit www.innerworkcoaching.life for more content or to apply for one-on-one coaching. With unconditional love and light, I wish you an amazing week, and I hope to see you again for my next video. Namaste.